All right, it's 7:01, folks. I will call the meeting to order. I do want to remind folks that in keeping with an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, signed into law by Governor Baker on June 16th, 2021. Pardon?
Okay, I'm going to make sure everyone else is muted. Sorry about that.
No worries. This meeting will be conducted remotely over Zoom. Attendance by board or commission members will be remote, and remote attendance shall count toward quorum. This meeting, as a reminder, will be broadcast live and recorded on each.
What's up on your computer? Tell me this thing's.
Can we not mute?
I have everyone that I can, here we go.
I think that might have been Dennis.
Yes, I believe that was the latest offender.
Exactly.
Sorry, sorry,
I was
Stephanie.
going to say, okay.
I'm
Come on, Katie, this isn't the first rodeo.
I'm
can't
having
even-
trouble connecting.
All right, okay. It's funny because I can't even see you as calling in, but that's fine.
I'll be quiet. Sorry.
Oh, good. Appreciate having you, Dennis. So,
I'm gonna see if I can rename you.
I will take a roll call. I'm just going to read it off in order of the website when I announce your. If you could just say your name and then present. James Lee.
Jim Lee, present.
Gregory Strange.
He's muted.
He's muted. We'll circle back. Carol Lundeen. Noted, not present at this time. Edmund Hands.
Ed Hands here.
Thomas Broussard, present. Dennis Sheedy.
Dennis here.
John Ventresco.
John Ventresco, present.
Amanda Varela.
Varela, present.
And Meredith Keach.
Meredith Keach, present.
Fantastic. So welcome, everybody. It is great to see you again. I will apologize in advance if I do lose internet. I am traveling today, so I appreciate somebody jumping in on this stream. Today, just an overview of the business. We do have a minutes review that we will look at, releasing previously accepted minutes, accepting some minutes but not releasing, and then accepting and releasing other minutes. We do have Wendy Nightingale. Wendy, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about our long-range forecast. And I think there is some very short-term great news you're going to share with us, which is much appreciated.
Yes.
Then we do, pardon?
Thank you for having me.
Well, absolutely. Thank you for coming. It's appreciated. We do have some possible CPA applications for our May 2022 annual town meeting for consideration. Lastly, the consideration for possible executive session to discuss items that, if we had discussed them in the meeting, would have a detrimental effect on the voting position of our public body. So with that, I'll start it off just with the minutes. I would be happy, unless there are issues, to take a motion to release the previously accepted executive session minutes dated February 11th, 2021, March 18th, 2021, April 8th, 2021, July 8th, 2021, and September 9th, 2021.
Move it.
Do we have a second?
Second.
So the move it, was that you, Mr. Ventresco, and the second, was that you, Mr. Hands?
Yes.
So, Tom, if I could just jump in there. Was that a motion to release the previously accepted, executive session minutes?
That's what was listed on our agenda tonight, yes, is the first item.
Right, and I think the discussion needs to be whether the board is ready to release those minutes.
Yeah, if I may, those minutes, I believe, are going to reflect possible negotiations on properties that we are still discussing, so we may not want to release those.
Got it. Then I would probably just make a recommendation, and then, Mr. Strange, I appreciate you adding that color. Next time, we should probably ensure that it would list the discussion of those and not just the release of those.
Correct, that's great.
On our agenda. So just to make sure we follow form, there was a motion made and there was a second. I would assume, since we've been informed with that information from Greg, that I myself will vote no. I think that's the right protocol, Stephanie, so that we
Yes.
define that.
Yes.
So I'll start with, and so that everybody understands what's happening is, there was a motion to release them. It was seconded, so technically we have to vote on it. No vote would stop the release of those for the reasons that Greg pointed out, due to the sensitive matters that are contained. And as such, Broussard votes no. James Lee,
Lee, no.
Greg Strange,
Strange, no.
Carol, I assume has not come yet.
So I just texted her. She said she's late. She's just getting off on 24 from 495. So
Thank you, Stephanie. Hopefully she's safe. That's the
Yeah.
important item. And if someone could just call out when she joins. Mr. Hands, you seconded, so
I'm voting no.
voting no. Dennis Sheedy,
Sheedy, no.
John Francesco,
I vote no, obviously, with the change, but can we release minutes that didn't pertain to executive session discussion?
I think that there are no minutes being proposed for acceptance except for October 14th, 2021 regular session, which would just be an acceptance. There is a discussion about October 14th, 2021 executive session minutes for acceptance. There was, although noted in the agenda, a release. I would probably argue, as I was at that meeting, that we would not want to release that due to the sense of matters being covered. Amanda, Varela, I apologize. I'm not sure if I caught your.
You didn't. Varela, no.
And Meredith?
Keach, no.
Okay, so the release of previously accepted executive session minutes has been declined. So we'll pull that forward. And I think going forward, now that I understand the way it's written in the content of those meetings, I'll make sure we're thoughtful in proposing that. October 14th, 2021 regular session. There is an item on the agenda to accept those. I would take a motion to accept those.
So move.
No,
Lee.
second. Hands.
So that's Lee and Hands. And again, in order of the listing on the website, James Lee,
Aye.
Can you repeat one more time, Tom? I'm sorry. Which ones did you propose? The
so
October 14th?
yes, that's
Okay,
exactly
yeah.
what it was. Regular session.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Greg,
Strange, aye.
Ed,
Hands, aye.
myself, Broussard, aye. Dennis,
Sheedy, aye.
John,
Francesco, aye.
Amanda,
Varela, aye.
and Meredith.
Keach, aye.
Excellent. The next item up on our agenda, I'm going to propose that a motion would be accepted for the October 14th, 2021 executive session minutes to accept but not release.
No move,
Lee.
Strange.
Sheedy, second.
So that's Strange and Sheedy. I appreciate that. And,
Scary law firm.
and James,
Are there any adjustments to that minutes?
did anybody have any proposed adjustments?
Okay. Lee, aye.
Greg,
Strange, aye.
Mr. Hands,
Aye.
Broussard's aye. Mr. Sheedy,
Sheedy, aye.
John,
Francesco, aye.
Amanda,
Varela, aye.
and Meredith.
Keach, aye.
Excellent. Appreciate us getting the minutes out of the way. And with that, I get to take a break and pass the microphone over to Wendy. Wendy, thank you again for joining us and hopefully walking us through some good news in terms of the long-range forecast. I know that there was some recent good news. I saw that the team appears to all know about it, but there's no harm in talking about good news once again. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen, and before I get going on the long-term forecast, I just kind of want to give you an update as to where we are with the fund. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Is it is it a spreadsheet or is it the presentation? I have two monitors, so it's hard for me to tell.
Presentation.
Okay, great. Okay. So let's start with just where we ended at the end of fiscal 21. Fiscal 21 was another really good year for revenues. 2.2 million collected. Surcharge was $1,427,000. We got the state distribution of $468,702. That was almost 100,000 more than the previous year's state trust fund distribution, so that was great news. Investment income of almost 100,000, and then that other category for last year was an interest payment that was made from Shovelworks on the loan. So total 2.2 million from inception, 20 years. You're looking at 29, almost $30 million. That's really, really impressive. And that state match is a little over 28% of that total. So Easton's done very well with the Community Preservation Fund, and obviously getting in on it early and getting those state matches has been has really boosted the revenues of the fund and the ability to fund projects. So as of July 1st, every year after the end of the fiscal year, the undesignated fund balance gets recalculated. So the undesignated fund balance, which is your revenues and your expenses, just the year-end results of operations, and this is just the undesignated fund balance. The fund balance itself is actually higher for money that's already been appropriated for other projects. But this is just the undesignated that's available for appropriation. So that was, 5.7 million. And then in fiscal 22, there's also an annual budgeted reserve that was voted as part of the overall budget. And basically the annual budgeted reserve it's basically the difference between what you estimate for revenues for that particular year, less whatever you're reserving or appropriating for that year, so that you don't lose the ability to appropriate those estimated revenues if something comes up after the tax rate has been set. So you can just appropriate at a special town meeting or even at the annual town meeting from that budgeted reserve line. So that gives you a total going into town meeting of $6,575,000. That's really, really great number. I mean, really every year the fund balance just keeps increasing, which is great. And then I also wanted to note that since July 1st, we also got an additional payment from the Shovelworks project toward the accumulated interest, $409,000. So that was a really good amount, because the year before was only $207,000. And the way the loan is set out is that basically we get what's left. We get a distribution of whatever's left of their cash flow up until the loan becomes due. So that was a really good payment, and that will become part of the undesignated fund balance at the beginning of next fiscal year, July 1, 2022. The loan itself, what's remaining on that loan, so the principal was $4,350,000, and with the accumulated interest, it's just under 4.7 right now, and it will mature on March 20, 2031. So this year's budget now, so in terms of the good news that Tom had referenced before, we got notified earlier this week of what the state match was going to be for fiscal 22. We don't know that going into town meeting, so it's kind of hard to estimate, what that's going to be. But we just got notified this week, right before we got our tax rate set, of what that amount was: $673,660. That's really great. I mean, that's up over 200,000 over the previous year. So that was excellent. And now because of that, we had only estimated our original budget $250,000 for that match. So this was so much more that it is going to require at the annual town meeting that there be additional reservations made for community housing and for historic resources of $39,866,000 each. So we can meet the requirements of the law.
Wendy, can I just ask you to back up for just a second and
Sure.
please, I know this this might be ignorant, but your first slide, just for clarification, gave one number. Yep. So the actual fiscal year 2021, the 2.2 million, and then you go forward a couple, and you had mentioned, at town meeting, and it was a 6.5 million. Sorry, back up one. So available for appropriation. So we have 6.5 million that we could use for applications. That's what's available? Is that what it means? Okay, all right.
Yes, yeah. That's your accumulated surplus since the beginning of when CPA was passed.
Okay, so I guess that's where I'm getting tripped up. I see one over the last 20 years, and I'm just not sure. So as we go in for the application process,
yes,
we have available 6.5 million. Theoretically, if we wanted to drain it all, we could drain 6.5 million.
Yeah,
and available.
Right, and I mean, you could, if you do a borrowing authorization, then you could authorize even more.
Right.
But in terms of just available funds, 6.5 million.
Thank you.
So the fiscal 22 budget, so there will be additional funds needed to be appropriated at the annual town meeting. So just keep that in mind. And so I also figured I would estimate the 2023 budget. And I think at this point, we really hadn't put in any estimates for like investment income, but that has been, relatively significant over the years. It did go down from the previous year because of everything going on with interest rates and things like that. But I think it would be reasonable to put for fiscal 23 a $50,000 estimate for investment income and a $400,000 state trust fund distribution, because I think, 250 is just, it's too low. The amounts have been really good in the last few years. So I think 400,000 is reasonable, and then $1,575,000 for the surcharge. So that would be my recommendation for your estimated revenues for the May town meeting. And then from that, so your bonded debt service, which is debt service that we absolutely know it's already been bonded. That's $498,113. Does not include the authorization though for the town hall restoration project, because we haven't borrowed for that, so we don't know what that debt service is going to be exactly at this point. And we'll probably issue a bond anticipation note initially, so you wouldn't have principal costs; it would just be interest for that, and we'll have a better idea of that when we get into, get closer to town meeting. Administrative costs, if you were just going to do the 5%, which is the cap, that would be $101,250. The historic resources reserve, and then the affordable housing trust or community housing reserve would each be $202,500. There is no reserve here for open space, and that's because the debt service relates to open space, so it meets the spending requirement of 10%. And then that annual budgeted reserve is basically the plug, which brings you to the $2,025,000. So, aside from projects, obviously, any projects that you want to move forward with, you could instead of doing the $1 million for the annual budgeted reserve, you could just fund those projects. So you have a lot of flexibility. This is not set in stone, but the annual budget and reserve could change depending on what projects you want to fund. Any questions on that? And then this is just, where you are with debt. So your debt outstanding right now at the end of fiscal 21, your outstanding principal was $4,085,000 for these properties. And but it does not include the town hall restoration, which was $1,450,000. That's authorized and unissued at this time. And these are the final years that they'll be paid off. So in a few years, the Governor Ames preservation restriction will be paid off, and then a few more years after that, the Dean Street land, and then you still have a little ways to go for Chestnut Street and the Gill property. So that's the end of the slideshow. Yeah.
And Wendy, if I may just, and Tom, if I may interrupt just for a second or interject. One of the things that the board had asked was for an kind of an outlook if the board, if the committee were to move forward with certain potential land acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
And because those are still under consideration, I believe that should probably be done in executive session.
Yes. So, and also I just wanted to add that, so this particular screen here just shows kind of what your annual surpluses would be, based on projecting out the surcharge and putting in the known quantities that we know of so far. The debt that we have on the books, how much you'd have to reserve for historic resources and community housing. And this only shows the surcharge. It doesn't show an estimate for the state match or any other revenues. And the reason I did this is just because when you do consider borrowing, and we have to provide information to our bond counsel for when we issue the debt, they want to see projections without any of that information, because the state surcharge is not guaranteed. So I figured for this, we just show what your amounts would be, with just the surcharge, and then anything else is really just a bonus. And the fact that you have $5,750,000 in your undesignated fund balance.
So if I could, Wendy, just to I guess put a fine point on it, we currently have at the very bottom our current unreserved fund balance of $5.75 million. If fiscal year 23 proceeds the way the surcharge estimate of $1.55 million is expected, we would have anticipated expenditures of $886. So the resulting surplus of $666, in theory, if we did nothing else as it stands, would be added to the $5.75 million.
That's correct.
And you would therefore carry over into fiscal year 24. You would have over 6.416, if my math is correct, surplus unreserved fund balance, and you would add to it 714,515. And to your point, in going back to 23, that 666 of surplus is, one could in theory say, is conservatively stated, because it would be likely, but I absolutely agree with your approach and appreciate the financing implications. But that, to your point, doesn't include anything from the state.
Correct. Right. So in every year that goes by that, that money is not used up, obviously your position is going to grow by more than this. But it also depends too on what projects you decide to fund. But you certainly, I feel like what this shows really is that the committee has a lot of flexibility in terms of what kinds of projects they will be able to fund, near future, long term. And again, these amounts are just annual amounts, they're not cumulative. So just on the surcharge alone, you know, if you wanted to leverage all the money and issue debt, you could still, you know, afford a pretty significant, you know, amount of borrowing
Sure.
in the fund.
Wendy, just as a generalization, where would you characterize the cost of capital or the cost of debt in the current state, current times?
Actually, I don't have debt. I mean, debt right now, like in terms of like interest rates and things.
Correct.
Yeah. So we just issued a very large bond issue for the Blanche James School. It was like $35 million, and I don't have the exact number, but I mean, I feel like it might have been like 2.3% was the net interest cost on the debt. I mean, it does vary because like the coupon rates vary, and then we got a large premium that was applied to the principal to reduce, you know, the amount of principal outstanding. But basically, you know,
Is it fair to say that interest rates are relatively low
interest rates right now are fantastic.
as compared to historical levels, and
Yes,
therefore the cost of funding debt service is also therefore low because of low interest rates?
that's correct. Yep.
Okay.
I mean, I'd probably use like 3.5%, you know, if I was gonna do projections for now. That's what I'd go with 3.5%, but our last bond issue was 2.3, and it went out, you know, it was a very long-term bond issue too, so any shorter term borrowings are gonna probably have a lower rate. Like in particular, like when you go out and you issue like a bond anticipation note, you know, you're gonna be paying probably like 1% or maybe even less
Sure.
on that. So.
Good to know. Team, I definitely would welcome any questions that you might have for Wendy or any thoughts regarding the presented materials.
Specifically, Wendy, can we get a copy of all this? It'd be so helpful when we're making decisions with applicants and being able to refer to this and pull it up.
Yep, I can get that.
I can't believe how much, just looking at the Gill Farm and how much we dropped down. I mean, when was that purchased? I lose track of time.
2014 and 15.
I was trying to say 6-7 years ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
wow, done well with that then, $1.9 million.
Yes.
Now we have to figure out what to do with it, but we won't go there.
Good point, though. Thank you, John. Team, anybody else have questions for Wendy? All right, Wendy, as I had grown accustomed to, clearly your presentation always has all the information and details that answers most of the questions before we finish. So it's greatly appreciated. Let me just check the order of business here. I do know we have discussion for updates, Stephanie, that you're going to provide on the possible CPA applications. Before we let Wendy potentially go for the evening, Stephanie, was it your indication from your commentary earlier that it might be beneficial to have Wendy join executive session if we were to so enter it for potential?
That was my understanding of one of the things the board wanted. Again, was in consideration of the topics that are being discussed in potentially in executive session, to have Wendy be able to help kind of do a forecast.
So Wendy, with that said, if it's all right, I'll give you a break for a few moments while we go through the possible CPA applications, and then invite you to join us at the appropriate time in executive session.
Okay, very good.
On behalf of all of us, Wendy, thank you so much for that.
Yep, so I'll just,
All right.
I'll stop my screen share first of all.
Perfect. So with that, we do have on the agenda today to discuss a series of topics for possible CPA applications that Stephanie will be giving us an update on, and certainly ask the team for engagement. The May 22 annual town meeting, just by way of summary, those items include the Southeastern Cemetery Fence Amendment, the Unionville Field Revitalization, also known as the Pickleball Amendment, the Affordable Housing Trust, Oaks Ames Memorial Hall, and the Town Office Restoration Project, the consideration for some supplemental funds possibly being required. So, Stephanie, do you mind leading us through some discussion on this topic?
I will. I'm also going to call on Wayne. The first two items relate to kind of expanding on applications and awards that were granted previously. We've had some conversation about the pickleball fields, but I'm going to let Wayne start with Southeastern Cemetery fence potential amendment to that application.
Thank you. Yeah, so we had talked a couple of months ago that the Southeastern Cemetery Fence Restoration Project was proceeding really well, and I'm happy to report that it's actually done now. They've finished all the work under their original funding. And as we talked about a few months ago, since it's a volunteer group of elderly folks who had a hard time getting started, especially with COVID, it might make sense to invite them to amend their application and request additional funds to complete the work. They had applied for and gotten funding to restore the southern 2/3 of the fence and the masonry pillars, and left out of that request was 14 sections of replicated fence on roughly the northern third. So with this group's encouragement, I reached out to them and they got updated estimates from the masonry contractor to do some extra footing work, and the DeAngelis Ironworks, the folks who are doing the fence construction. And those two together, the ironwork would be $88,800 and the masonry would be $4,300. So they will probably come or there will be at the December CPC meeting an application for, I believe, if I've done my math, $93,100 to complete all of the work. So that is Southeastern Cemetery fence. Just want to give people a heads up. And I think sort of as context, looking ahead to the May 22 annual town meeting, the warrant gets finalized in, I believe it's February. So, warrant articles go to the select board for their consideration towards the beginning of the year, sort of a January, February sort of way. So for CPC warrant articles for May 22 annual town meeting, the CPC would be looking to consider applications and possibly make recommendations in December or possibly January at the latest. Stephanie, I think that's a roughly accurate timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Work looks beautiful, by the way.
Doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm so pleased. And they got additional donations to do some really nice granite caps on the pillars, and they got donations as well, I believe, from the late Avery Lee Williams, for those trees, which seem to be thriving. So just really happy it's come out so well.
For a nice frame of reference, if you drive down Church Street, the fencing there is gone into some disrepair. And so when you drive down 138, when it's in such pristine condition, you just kind of keep going. It looks lovely. But if you happen to be driving down Church Street, you can kind of see where some of that fencing was prior to their restoration. And boy, is it a big difference.
Nice. Yeah, thank you for that. And if you know anybody associated with the Church Street Cemetery.
That's a town cemetery, so it's the local commission.
Okay, it's good to know.
And just as an aside, the best estimate of the age of that fence is around 100 years. They were going to put a playground in there back in 1908. They got as far as putting the fence in.
Oh. So you were 5 when that fence went in?
Yeah. Meredith, would you apologize for Wayne to your mother when?
I was gonna say something and then I just kept quiet.
I found the entire project a joy to be working on, I gotta say.
It's beautiful. It really is.
Often, that's great.
So, the pickleball courts, everybody knows this was approved for construction at town meeting last May. I have updated the board in the past. We went out to bid. The estimate for the project was around $320,000. That is what was awarded at we awarded at annual town meeting when we went out to bid. We received 2 responses. One was around $450,000 and the other one was $700,000 in change, which was way over budget. We, working with members of the pickleball group or club, I don't know if they're a formal club, and the Recreation Commission, we went through, and it seemed that the over the additional cost, if you look at the lower end, was pretty much in line with inflation rates of what we're seeing for costs in goods and services. But again, it was significantly over what had been budgeted. So we've gone back and working with the engineer's office, are putting together a revised cost estimate. They did get back to us with one. I met with Dick Kelly and Chuck Kramer from the pickleball group, as well as Ian Daly and Tana Babbitt from the Recreation. Tana's the new chair of the Recreation Commission, and I think everyone knows that Ian Daly is the Recreation Director in town. And what we're doing in getting a revised estimate is there are aspects of the project, elements of the project that will be eliminated, and then there will be components of the project that are going to be bid out as add-alts. So, for example, the initial proposal was for 6 pickleball courts. Everyone has agreed that getting new pickleball courts is important, so that a minimum of 4 would be acceptable. And so we'll add the 2 additional courts, 5 and 6, as alternatives. And there are some other alternatives that will be added as well. I'm waiting for the cost estimator to finalize that cost and draft it in a format that we consider acceptable. We'll review it again with the team that I've been working with. And the plan is to prepare the bid documents to go out to bid January, February timeframe, with the hope that we get something more in line with what's in the budget. And we could potentially proceed with construction costs, maybe not funding the alt ads at this point in time, but going back and asking for additional funding for the alt ads. So that's kind of generally what the discussion is at this point. And really tonight, it was just to kind of keep the committee updated on what's happening on that. And, I'll have more information next month at next month's meeting.
Mr. Chair, if I may? Please. Stephanie, I'm just wondering, the original bids, what's the time period that those are locked in for? I'm assuming it's probably already expired.
Well, because they were so far over budget, we rejected them, so.
So is there a ballpark budget or target that, with these deletions and alts that they're targeting? Because here, and I'll round up my question with this. My concern is what you just described is going to take 6 months, and it looks like inflation could very well take off even more. So what do we do if up the road we find out that 4 courts with fewer options or features is the same price or even more?
then I would expect the Recreation Commission, and Meredith can speak to this. She has spoken at past meetings about the need, and I don't, maybe Meredith just stopped her video. The Rec Commission is committed to constructing new pickleball courts. So I think if it comes in higher, that they will be looking for additional funding. So I think we need to be prepared for an article or a request for May town meeting. And that's the whole idea, is to try to get ahead of that with the bid process and get bids in.
Can I jump in just real quick? So just to kind of give some color here, the bids that came in were really a crushing blow for the pickleball folks. Stephanie has led them, helped them, assisted them through the process. There's years of work in play here and time spent on it. And to have those estimates come in so extraordinarily high was it was a real bummer. And so the pickleball folks, along with Recreation, to Stephanie's point, are committed. We know the need and want. It's, I believe, the #1 fastest growing sport nationwide. We have a huge population of individuals who here in Easton want to play and want to use these courts. And we were hopeful that they would have already been constructed by now. Obviously, a lot's been delayed because of the COVID pandemic, but then the price increases are really difficult. But to Stephanie's point, the folks are going back to see what they can cut out of the original plan to make it more cost effective at this point, and to be able to get that construction up and running, to your point, Greg, as quickly as possible.
If I may, one more question, Tom?
Actually, just two things, John, if that's okay. First, I do want to, just for the minutes, note that Carol and Dean have joined, and make sure that it's referenced that she is present and available for the discussion here as well. And certainly, John, please go for it.
My question, Meredith, is refresh my memory. Did the question come up about donations or private funding, fundraising, naming rights, anything that could offset some of these costs?
I think we touched on it a little bit. Stephanie, help me out. I think that there were some funds. I remember Bert had mentioned that they had started some small donation type protocol, but nothing on large scale that I'm aware of. Stephanie, help me if I'm missing.
No, that's the same. That's my understanding as well, that they were raising funds that probably would pay for some of what I'm going to call accessory items, like one of the items that was included in the original bid, and which we've taken out for the second estimate, was a concrete pad with, I think there was a bench and a canopy to provide some respite, and it would have been installed between the courts. And I think that some of that funding that Bert was talking about would pay for something like that, probably for a storage chest, for equipment that could be kept on site, smaller items like that.
To Greg's point, so we don't run into this again, we get, approved funding and we're behind again because it might take 6 months or a year. Is the demand so high with contractors that we can't tie them up and say, listen, can you give us a bid pricing on this for the next 6 to 8 months, so we don't have to go back and, okay, now it's another $100,000?
Once we accept a bid, they are locked in for at least 6 months.
So, okay, so
they're locked in for so one of the things is a completion by date, and they're locked into the prices for the completion by date. That's my understanding. I will confirm that.
So how far off are we on this? By 4 months, 5 months? From when we started this to at the 330, now jumping to almost as high as $750,000.
I mean, we're
we're
a year. I mean, we've lost a whole year on this.
So we've lost a year, so that costs, I just try to comprehend this. you're talking $500,000 in 1 year. It's cuckoo, right? It's hard to comprehend.
So John, what we're dealing with is the pandemic pricing post COVID. I see it certainly in my industry. We got to a point with building new construction in Easton. They're back up again, but a lot of our local builders, developers completely halted construction this year because they were losing their shirt on contracts that they had signed, and the costs continued to go up at a weekly, if not daily basis. We've seen some leveling off of this, but the additional problem is labor. I can't get a contractor for 6 months. And if you're looking for work done, any contractor worth his salt is booked out for 6 months. And so for a large scale project like this, that's exactly what we're dealing with. And that's where the crushing blow came in, because so much work had been done. And to Stephanie's point, we lost a good solid year and more, because now we have to go back through the process. As we know, these types of projects don't happen overnight. And when you have all of the steps that need to come into play, we basically are back at the beginning. And back at the beginning, meaning they have to go through the design plan again to try to eliminate some parts of it at this point that won't be damaging to the whole, but will be cost effective at this point. So they were things that were completely outside of the pickleball crew's control and were lost in the pandemic.
To that end, back to, I think, the point that Greg was also making, Stephanie, did you indicate that it would be January and February you would hope to rebid?
Yes, yes.
So does that indicate, according to Wayne's timeframe, where we have to make our votes essentially for the May town meeting, that we don't have a shot to get something on the docket for May?
We can put a placeholder in the warrant, and then, what is it, Wayne? It's about 3 weeks before town meeting that the warrant actually closes. So that would, again, like next month, we'll probably make a decision or a suggestion that when we're asked for articles, for the potential articles for the warrant, of course, the CPC usually has something for that, we put a placeholder.
So is there anything that we can do that, obviously this is a very important initiative. I know it appears by the rhetoric of this call that the team has some support for it, and it certainly seems that the community has a great demand for it. Is there anything that we can do to make sure that we begin working after, I guess I'd say tomorrow, so to speak, so that we can begin that rebid process, so we can ensure we try to
We're working on that. That is in process.
I just want to jump in that Chuck Kramer wants to weigh in. He put it in the chat.
I appreciate that, Matt. Thank you.
If I could just real quick,
Please do.
I understand the rules of procurement and all, but and you all know I get concerned when municipalities build, because things like this happen, and now we're looking at, you know, another year, and you know, has there been, this is basically 3 tennis courts. This is, I don't look at this as a large scale project, but Meredith brings up all good points that are certainly affecting our industry right now. But I also know this town is flush with folks that do this type of work for municipalities. And I'm just wondering, as part of the bidding process, is there any solicitation or any, you know, we still are a town of 25,000. I know I sound like I beat a dead horse, but I get nervous. We keep handling everything like with this giant municipality, and we end up with problems like this. We've been talking about this for 3 or 4 years, I think, and it's just a couple tennis courts. So perhaps I would love to see if the folks handling this maybe reached out to some of the landscape constructors, some of the site work folks, and some of the GCs in town that do municipal work. And there was recently there was one in line who did a pickleball court under the municipality. You know, and maybe they can reach into their town pride, and maybe they will give us a better price, and so we can actually get something built.
I think that's fair, Greg. I think, you know, candidly, there's always good value in following processes and getting the support of the non-bid process. And there's also great value to thinking outside the box and seeing if there are opportunities to mitigate and speed up processes as well. So I think that's fair. Stephanie, is there?
If I can respond to that.
Form on that? That'd be great.
We do let people know that we're going out to bid. We let local bidders know. We did receive interest, although we did not receive an actual bid from at least one, I'm sorry, not at least one, from two local contractors. One that did bid was Rambo Steak. And we also received a request for the bid package from another local. So we absolutely do that. We do have to follow the procurement law, but that actually is to ensure as much advertising of your bid as possible. So you can get as many responses and hopefully responsible ones, and ones that will allow us to move forward with the project. I think, Greg, you know, you've said this several times, it's just tennis courts. I think that the pickleball people will tell you that it's not just a matter of laying down bituminous concrete, that it's like any structure that you want to last for many years. You have to do it properly. You have to lay down the proper base. And as you know and are pointing out, there are certainly local contractors that are capable of doing that work.
I certainly wasn't implying that tennis courts are built cheaply or shoddy.
Not at all, not at all. I
Can
think
we
it's.
let Chuck weigh in?
May I ask my question first because he
Yeah,
may know
Meredith,
the answer
if it's
to it?
okay, Meredith, I'll pause on accepting feedback until all the committee have had an opportunity to engage, and then absolutely would welcome those comments. Amanda?
My question, which Chuck may be able to shed some light on, I believe I saw that Dana Barros had pickleball courts now. Is that completely independent of this group? I'm asking out of curiosity, not that it has an effect on this project.
I'm sorry, who's Dana Barros?
I didn't aware of that. That's great to know.
Stoughton, 138, Stephanie?
Yeah, it's in the old, like, I think it was a Ford dealer. It's the basketball place.
Yes.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, no, I'm not aware of that project at all.
Sorry, if I could, just for the committee, is there any other comments before we happily let Mr. Kramer speak? Just want to make sure the committee has had a chance to voice any of their thoughts first. Greg, if you tried to chat, you were on mute. I saw your lips move, but I couldn't tell if you were saying anything.
No, just talking to myself.
Yeah, it's only trouble if you answer yourself. All right, so with that, Mr. Kramer, thank you for your patience while we just sorted through the committee's comments, and welcome to the committee tonight. I'd like to recognize, if I could, if you could just say your name, Mr. Kramer, and your address.
Chuck Kramer, I live at 49 Gaslight Lane in Northeastern.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to state that I think you're correct there. We've already removed a number of elements that we wanted in the project to reduce cost, and we sent it back through to the engineer, and Stephanie went over a couple of them. We don't need to, I don't think, go into all of the elements, but we did reduce the project considerably. And it's still, the pricing that came in with the estimator was still quite high. Through competitive bids, it probably, we're hoping it'll come in a little bit lower, but it's still way over budget for what was put in initially. I wanted to just suggest something that I was going to suggest to the Recreation Committee, but they haven't had another meeting yet, that we phase this project. And projects can have alternates, and they also can be phased, and take part of the project and request more money from the town, like Stephanie suggested. And if we took the parking lot and the drainage and everything from there, and just built the courts as phase one, and then as phase two, have the parking go in, it would probably bring this project in line with the initial budget, we're hoping. But that's just a suggestion that if something like that can be considered, and then you can put, Stephanie can put a marker in for the additional funds, and it'll happen in the following year. You put it out to bid. I think that's all I wanted to suggest to you to perhaps consider.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Committee, any thoughts or questions
Actually, I can,
And or about what he said?
yeah, in regards to what Mr. Kramer had mentioned, phasing is very tempting, but my experience with projects like that in the long run, it's gonna cost you far more than the high price you're getting now of $750. If we're gonna do this project, in my opinion, just do it and be done with it than phasing it out over several years, and we're gonna run into even higher costs.
Fair.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if I was part of the team, I'd say, I'd talk to the folks, if the team felt the 450 bid was confident to go with, then let's do it. Let's go to springtown meeting at 450, see if they'll, talk to the folks, see if they'll hold it in. This phasing, it's never gonna be cheaper. And it's, if we're gonna do this, we should do it as efficient as possible and hope for more accurate estimating going forward, so we don't get, so these poor pickleball people don't have to keep waiting 2 and 3 years for a construction project.
And I will just say that I've talked with the chair of the Recreation Commission, I've talked with Ann Daly, and they feel that the parking area is critical to the project. And the drainage, you have to have drainage for the courts as well as the parking, so.
I do appreciate, Mr. Kramer, though, this clearly is a challenge for us that we all are trying to solve, and thinking of it in a different way certainly may jog something of an opportunity. So appreciate that, Mr. Kramer, and certainly welcome the committee's feedback as well about trying to get it done as efficiently and quickly and holistically as possible. I do, just only because it was referenced, I did call up the Dana Barros Pickleball Courts. Again, for everybody's edification, it's on 138, just over the line in Stoughton on the right-hand side. Their pickleball courts are indoors. They basically set up nets that on their basketball courts and form courts here. So it's not what I would call a similar project to what we're looking to accomplish here. Otherwise, we may call them and ask them who their contractor was. Never know. So I guess at this point, I do believe it's fair on what Greg proposed, and perhaps there is a way that we can reach out to folks on a local basis, and maybe we can pull some names, and you never know if you ask again what might shake out. And Stephanie, it feels like that is acceptable, but certainly just a separate parallel path to the existing process that we have going on. Do you have an estimated time frame for when we might expect to get revised bids back based upon the new scope?
So I'm expecting the updated cost estimate within the next week. They've had it for a couple weeks now. And then the bid documents just need to be updated with that. I mean, they're already in condition to go. We just need to make an update with the items. And that, I would say, probably a couple of weeks, because we're hitting the holiday season. Then it goes out to bid. It's probably a 4-week process there. So again, I think we're looking January, February timeframe.
Okay.
And I'll have a better sense of that at the next meeting.
Okay. Team, is there anything else that we would like to provide in terms of direction or commentary, or is it acceptable as laid out that we get?
I have a question. You bring up the Dana Barros. I mean, he's a resident of Easton who owns that property. Has anybody ever thought about approaching him and I mean, I know they're indoors, but that was a pretty substantial project.
Yeah, but
The courts themselves?
they're completely different scopes of work. I mean, that's an indoor, and there's just no apples and oranges.
Yeah, they literally strung 2 nets across and put down some tape. I'm not simplifying it, but they're basically repurposing their existing basketball courts, laying out a grid, and then putting the temporary nets across, and they pull them down every day so that I'm sure that they can do their main line of business, which is basketball. If anybody wants to see it, it's facebook.com Dana Barros Official. You can go check it out. It's one of their first pictures. I think it's the second reference down. They posted it on October 31st. And I think it's pretty clear. It's an entirely different matter.
Yeah, if I can interject on that, I think I speak for almost the entire troop because I think they were playing outside most of the winter last year, even through the cold, and as long as it wasn't raining or snowing. Part of the attraction of the sport is to play outside in the fresh air and sunshine. And to go inside, the people who play inside are the ones that usually can't tolerate the sunshine. And are forced to do that, or because of inclement weather. So I don't think that facility compares with what we're trying to do here.
Makes
I
sense.
wasn't suggesting it as such. I just wanted to make sure people were aware of it, given the delay.
No, they do play inside there and also at Fort Kicks. I think it's in Taunton, and there's another one close by also. That during the winter, that's the alternate place to play. But during the summer, it doesn't get used.
Appreciate it.
Mhm.
All right, unless there's any objection, I move on to, and thank you, Mr. Kramer, again, and thank you to the public who joined on this topic. Hopefully the discussion that we spent on it today and the effort we continue to put forth demonstrates our recognition of how important it is to the community and our continued commitment to working with all of the stakeholders involved to try to find a successful resolution. So it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
With that, should we move on, team, to the Affordable Housing Trust and get an update, Stephanie, on that?
Yeah, and I'm going to turn over to Wayne.
Hi, thank you, everybody. So another application to look ahead to would be from the Affordable Housing Trust for annual funding. As folks may be aware, the Affordable Housing Trust is funding and working with a consultant, Old Colony Planning Council, to update the state mandated housing production plan for the town of Easton. And an additional part of that would be the action plan for the Affordable Housing Trust. And some of the longer serving members may remember that the action plan has the now expired one, and the upcoming one is intended to have annual budgets and projects, and that is the thing that the trust has used in the past to attach to its request for funding to show what its annual budget would be going forward. That's not going to be ready in time to get a warrant in, and so mindful of that, and similar to what the trust did last year, they anticipate asking the 10% community housing set aside, which has been a historic pattern for the trust several times in the past. So they will come with an application at the December meeting for that 10% community housing set aside. And I believe, if I've understood Wendy's slideshow correctly, that looks like it would be $202,500. And then sometimes in previous years, that has been just a subset of the sort of omnibus CPA budget request. And sometimes it's a standalone warrant article. I'm not sure how Wendy might recommend that it, the form it takes. But sort of looking ahead, that's what the trust is anticipating.
And Wayne, does that include, I noticed on Wendy's slide that there was some requirement of an additional amount? I thought it was $39,000. Does that?
Correct. But my understanding, if I've read this correctly, so it's $177,500 was last year's, and then with the additional money, there's $39,866. But then I think that 177.5 is a bit different for the next fiscal year because that number has also changed a bit. So I think you put it all together, and I believe the 10% is going to be $202,500 as a bit of an estimate.
We'll trust you and Wendy to make sure you get us the right. Team, does anybody have any questions for Wayne on that particular topic? All right, hearing none. Next update is Oaks Eames Memorial Hall.
Right, so everyone will remember that we received a letter of interest for an application for funding for the repairs and restoration work, the remaining work the hall needs, that was identified in the needs assessment report, which that report was actually funded by the CPA back in 2014 or 2015. And we met, Wayne and I and Connor met with Fred Ames as well as their contractor. They've been working with Spencer Voigt and I can't remember the last.
Spencer, Sullivan, and Vogt.
That's right, Spencer, Sullivan, and Vogt. So we met with them to talk about the suggestion was that maybe they break the project up into two components. Before they can do the repair work, they really need design documents for the repairs that need to be done in the restoration work, and they'll need bid documents so that they can go out and bid the project. So it was suggested that their ask for this year be for that design work and the bid specs, with the understanding that if that's voted and approved at town meeting, they would be moving forward with the full ask for the restoration work in 2023. But at that point in time, if that's passed at town meeting, then they would have the specs ready to go and they could go straight to bid. So I just wanted to give that update to the board. They were amenable to that. That also allows to build more support for the project in the meantime, and understand, and they're working on building their capacity to maintain the building going forward even after these restoration and repair work is done. So we'll see the application that they'll be submitting will reflect that ask.
Do you have any rough estimates on what the ask is going to be this year for the design documents? It seems like we've sponsored design documents for repairs for the last umpteen billion years. Is this the last ask for that?
Yes.
And how much might that be?
We're waiting for an estimate from Sullivan, Spencer, Sullivan, Vogt. But that will certainly be, and again, I would expect we need to have it. It'll be submitted before the next meeting.
Okay.
And then if anyone has any, I'm sorry, Tom.
That's okay. I don't blame you for trying to move us along efficiently. Anybody have any further questions on the Memorial Hall at this point? Hearing none. Certainly, Stephanie, on the town office update.
Yeah. So Spencer Sullivan Vogt is also doing the design and bid specs for the town offices repair work. And when we met with them regarding the hall, they let us know that in testing the windows at the town offices, they learned that they do contain asbestos. So the project's going to need asbestos abatement, and that wasn't anticipated in the projected costs for the project. So we will need to be asking for supplemental funds for that work.
And the approximate amount of?
We don't know. This is in no way binding. They said it might be about 300,000, but we don't know. That was a very rough estimate.
So, Tom, if I may, go ahead.
So I'm just saying, correct me, I thought the same firm, they went in and did a needs, to Ed's point, we've talked about this so many times on this building, but I thought they went in and did a needs assessment. And how do they miss such a large, I mean, certainly it's not a surprise for antique windows to contain these items. How did they miss this?
The budget for that needs assessment didn't include testing everything for asbestos.
Well, what about the scope? I mean, of course, we're not privy to seeing that, but I mean, this is a pretty common item in old buildings. How did they, I'm just surprised that this was missed. I mean, it's 300, what was, because what did we appropriate? 1.4, 1.2? I mean, this is a 20%, you know, and we have all these experts involved and they missed this. That's just kind of discouraging, but that's all I have to say.
If I may, yeah, Greg, I totally agree with Greg on this. And what is the capital funding? Is there anything from capital funding on this project? I get a little nervous. I mean, I'm representing historical here. I'm 100% on this project, but I don't want it to get mixed with, are we gonna be now funding the town hall for the next 10 years? It hasn't been touched since the 60s, and all of a sudden now it's needing this work. I tug at what's right and wrong here as far as, again, is the CPC now going to be funding all these capital projects? Where is the money coming from the town budget?
Yeah, and I raised this initially because I have grave reservations anytime that, you know, we're using substantial amounts of CPC, CPA funding for an entity that has taxation ability.
Absolutely.
So I think those are fair points. You know, the challenging thing is when you have the string along expenses, right? It adds up over time, and you somewhat become already, one might feel committed. And, you know, ideally we would have known about this, to Greg's point, at the very beginning, and it would have enabled us to have a meaningful conversation on if this number is whole, the $1.7 million project. And if we knew that at that time, would we have agreed to it? I'm sure we all see that there is tremendous merit to the project itself. Obviously, we felt it important enough to vote in support of it. So to your point, Wayne, it is an estimate. So I think it's important for us to make sure that we don't take it as concrete fact. But I do think that there's a lot of merit that the committee's trying to communicate and trying to ensure that the appropriate scopes, efforts, and initiatives and efforts on the front end might accommodate all of the anticipated expenses. And much like Greg is alluding to, I think we all know that at times things develop, but this seems to have been something, given the age of the building, might have been likely that we would have explored. So it makes sense for the team that we ensure that we wait to hear what the actual number is, and then that way we can take it in under advisement and understand what that cost implication might be. Wayne, when do you think we'll hear back on a more concrete projection?
I think end of the year, January-ish, something like that. The way I understand it is they're looking to have the construction, the bid package finished, and then put it out to bid and then get numbers back. I believe bids would be, and Stephanie might have a clearer memory of this than I do. I think March, start construction in March, something like that. Put it out to bid, and so that would inform what what that number actually is.
And just in terms of the context, you'd think I'd be more adept at this, but everybody needs a refresher. Should we proceed? Should we, as a committee, decide that this is something we wouldn't support, hypothetically? What is the mechanisms for the town government to go through the capital process and source the funding from other monies that might be available?
I don't know that there are other sources other than capital funds, and Wendy is still with us. She probably could answer that better than I could. I think generally what the discussion was, and I think this was raised when it was brought up, that perhaps the windows don't get restored.
Fair.
If that's the case, if there's not funding for it, but the rest of the project would move forward. And Wayne, you can correct me if that you didn't hear something similar to that. But
No, that is what I heard.
Sure. And Wendy, just in case the town did want to proceed, but yet the committee here did not want to fund it, what are the other mechanisms for the town to be successful with replacing the windows if they chose that path?
Yeah, that really would be difficult. I mean, I will say that, I mean, that's one of the reasons why some of this work has not gotten done, because there are so many competing capital needs in the town. And capital has been, you know, historically sort of underfunded, because we've got the issue with the budget, with the structural revenue deficit. That money, instead of going towards capital, is going, you know, toward the budget. So, you know, I would ask that the committee, you know, please consider, you know, funding these restorations of town hall, because it will be very difficult to find funds for that purpose, or they'll just be competing with other needs of the town. So something else, you know, doesn't get done, or, you know, either less money towards roads or DPW equipment. Like I said, there's just so many needs for the town, and you could even go and look at the on the town's website under financial reports and information. You can see, you know, what's on like the 5-year capital plan and all of those items that are, you know, have been like requested that are in the pipeline.
That's fair. And I don't think anything's indicating one way or another whether we would or would. I think we're just trying to suss out what the options might be. I think we all appreciate that the restoration of town hall is very important, and obviously by the support of the initial round of funding, I think this committee has already voiced their position in terms of the generalities of it. And I think it's also fair to express that there is an opportunity potentially to have captured some of this early on, and that happens too. I know, Greg, you, like I, have many projects, and wouldn't be the first time any of my projects developed a wrinkle, if that is an acceptable example. Meredith?
I would just make a quick recommendation that an investigation for federal funding or state funding for asbestos abatement might be looked at. I know there are funds available for lead abatement, and I would imagine there's the same for asbestos. I can do some research on my end.
And we can look at that on our end as well, Meredith.
Those, there's
a great point.
definitely gotta be funds available for that, for sure, particularly in a municipality, a municipal
Great
building.
point. Wendy, thanks for jumping in there, and certainly Wayne, Stephanie, thank you for bringing it up and helping us understand how we got here and why. Unless the committee has any other questions, I think we can move on regarding the town offices. Hopefully at our next meeting, Wayne, you'll be able to give us an update of a more refined cost estimate that we could consider.
I don't know that I will. I think a lot of it is contingent on what the bids end up looking like. So it may be after next meeting.
Okay, understood. All right, hearing no more thoughts on that, there are no other items for public discussion. So I do believe that there is reasons for us to enter into executive session. So as long as nobody has any general business, if I remember correctly, it would be a motion to conclude this open session and enter executive session, not to return to open session under purpose 6 of Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 21A, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property, as the chair is declaring that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body. And again, not to reconvene an open session. I do want to point out that we would be inviting for our support, Stephanie Danielson, Wayne, I think we invite you, so welcome. Wendy would be joining us as well, and Renee Lapierre would be joining as well to take notes. So if I did that right, Stephanie?
Yes, you did that perfectly.
Not so bad. I will take a motion for that.
So moved, please.
And
Second, hands.
So that's Lee and Hands, and with your name and a roll call vote, and if I still have up my handy dandy list, I will go in order of James Lee,
Lee, aye.
Greg Strain,
Strange eye.
Carol Lundin,
Lundin, aye.
Ed Hands,
Hands aye.
Tom Broussard, aye. Dennis Sheedy,
Sheedy, aye.
John Ventresco,
Andresco, aye.
Amanda Varela,
You're muted.
take that as a thumbs up, aye, and Meredith Keach.
Each eye.